You all got that live. That means we will be live in about 5 minutes. There's a bit of a delay to get started, and there'll be about a half-minute delay versus what's happening on YouTube versus what's happening here. Just a heads up.
Good.
You all got that live. That means we will be live in about 5 minutes. There's a bit of a delay to get started. And now that was the YouTube live playing back at me. I closed it out. First time doing the live, so we're learning together.
Great. I think my cousin from Australia may be on too.
Oh, that's awesome.
How she figured I couldn't tell her what time, she needed to get she's on tomorrow or something, or yesterday. I don't know.
Right. Ted, are you good to go?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Am I able to
Okay,
mute?
perfect.
Can I unmute and mute myself back and forth? Is that okay?
You should be, yeah. We can give it a go right now if you want.
Well, yeah, I think other folks can hear me, so I'll mute myself. It's just giving me all kinds of notifications about what I am allowed and not allowed to do, like a bad student.
Zoom treats everyone like they're a bad student, so it's okay.
You were late, Ted. You did make us nervous. God,
Perfect. All right. So usually I say we always wait about 5 extra minutes, but there's so many people here for a Zoom event. I'm almost a bit shook. Like, so how's everyone night going?
Do we have their books on that page?
Yes, it'll be on the bookshop. I can pull up Jason, if you wanted to pull up a link and drop it in the chat, that would be, or I can do it real fast.
I'm not even sure if I know where the link's at.
It's I can pull it up. Perfect. Yep, all the books can be purchased at the River Styx bookshop. We have its own little reading series section, so you can just click that and be able to pull from everyone's. Right.
Also, if you had any other links that we don't know about, or if you have a Twitter or something that I didn't catch or something like that, let us know, because we put that in the comments while while you're reading.
All right.
The readers did a good job. We've got a really good crowd. Thanks.
Yeah, this is great. Should we go ahead and get started? Perfect. Give me 1 second. All right. Ted, do we want to just see if you can unmute and remute again real fast just to test?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, welcome to the first virtual installment of the 2021 River Styx reading series. My name is Molly Harris. I'm the managing editor of River Styx Literary Magazine, and I'll be your host for the night. There is a $5 suggested donation, which you can pay through our website. We will be dropping the link into the chat later as well. To get us started, I'd like to thank the following for their support: the Regional Arts Commission, the Missouri Arts Council, the Missouri Humanities Council, the NEA, and the Kransberg Arts Foundation. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. This is such a nice crowd, especially at the start of the reading. We really appreciate it. I do want to take this time to remind everyone to please keep themselves muted while our writers are speaking. If you would like to give kudos or comment, feel free to utilize the chat box feature. Tonight, we have three amazing writers: Ted Mathis, Rebecca Copeland, and Jason Summer. First up is Ted Mathis. Ted Mathis is the author of Gold Cure, as well as Null Set, The Spoils, and Forge. He is the recipient of 2 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as fellowships for the New York Foundation of the Arts and St. Louis Regional Arts Commission. He was selected by Alice Notley for the Poetry Society of America's Cecil Hemley Memorial Award, and his poetry and criticism have appeared in American Poetry Review, BOM, Boston Review, Conjunctions, and other publications. Originally from Ohio, he holds an MFA in poetry from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where he received the John C. Schroops Fellowship for Excellence in Poetry, and an MA in International Environmental Policy from Tufts University. He lives in St. Louis, where he teaches at St. Louis University and curates the 100 Boots Poetry Series at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's really great to be here, and thank you to Molly and Jason and to River Styx for everything you do in terms of publishing, but also being good stewards of literary art in the community. I'm also excited to read with Jason and Rebecca tonight, and it's really a pleasure. I thought I would do something a little different than I normally do. I've had this feeling occasionally. I published this book last year, Gold Cure, and I've had a few opportunities to read from it. Occasionally I feel like the frame of a book is an imposition on poems that maybe unnecessarily divides them and shunts them off into a group, sort of like dividing kids at recess and telling the green group they're never allowed again to play with the yellow group, which I find sad. So I'm just going to read from all of my books in a kind of random order without any framing comments, some short poems for about 13 minutes. Again, thank you everyone for being here. Is that right? How long are we, is that okay? Or are we doing longer, shorter readings?
I believe Jason said 15 minutes, 15 to 20.
All right. Thank you. Great.
No problem.
All right. This first poem is called Fool's Gold. This morning, I love everyone, even Jerome, the neighbor I hate, and the sun. And the sun has pre-warmed my bucket seat for the drive up Arsenal Street with the hot car effect, a phenomenon climatologists use to explain global warming to senators and kids. I love the limited edition gold swingline stapler in the oil change lounge, which can, like a poem, affix anything to anything on paper. One sheet of paper, for instance, for that cloud of gnats, one for this lady's pit mix wagging his tail so violently, I fear he'll hurt his hips. One sheet for glittered lip balm, for eye contact, Bitcoin extortion, and the imperfect tense. Sheets for each unfulfilled wish I left in a penny in a mall fountain. Sun spills into the lounge through the window decal in geometric Tetris wedges. I have a sheet for Tetris, its random sequence of pieces falling toward me in this well, like color-coded aspects of the life I neglected to live, for the pleasure of making line after line disappear. The gold stapler has a 20-sheet capacity, so I straighten my stack on the reception counter and staple the day together with an echoing chunk. This next poem is called Pair of Hooves. One began as a front hoof, and one began as a rear hoof. As a remedy, they were coated in a baking soda and water paste and placed in a plastic bag, frozen overnight. In the morning, they were both front hooves, but one was larger than the other. As a remedy, they were submerged in isopropyl alcohol and exposed to intense UV rays. They then rivaled each other in size, but one was darker. As a remedy, they were massaged with tea tree and lavender oils. Both attained the color of rust, but then one hoof was to the right of the other and one hoof was to the left of the other. As a remedy, they were dunked in a bath with a ratio of 10:1 water to bleach. They surfaced with a newfound contiguousness, but then one hoof was a deer hoof and one hoof was an ox hoof. As a remedy, they were laced with daisies between their V's and sent down the river. When they arrived, they belonged to the same animal, but one hoof was living and one hoof was dead, and they smelled of the living and of the dead. As a remedy, a toothbrush was used to scrub until the living one bled and the dead one twitched, both in occlusion to the nothing that is. Interior with falling bodies. An atmospheric bacterium forms a hailstone around itself as a means of getting back to Earth. Heroic in the free fall nucleus of the skull, my best idea was ignorant of the structures of the storms until broken over the sudden hood of a Jeep. The evening news crew weeps mysteriously. A bomb-sniffing dog in the international terminal wears a vest that reads, "Do not pet me," unaware that nobody will. The epiphenomenon takes the source on a day hike, but misses, of course, the forest for the trees. A motion light reveals my position in the backyard of what I've been attempting to say. A starling mimics the ambulance. I put on my game face, but then I can't get it off. The leprechaun trap. The instructions for the monthly kindergarten family project are vague. For March, make a leprechaun trap. In the grainy example photo sent home in her unicorn backpack, a shoebox decked with aluminum foil is propped up by a popsicle stick over a coil of gold Mardi Gras beads. The child will pull a length of yarn tied to the stick when her prey caves to desire and wanders inside. If the assignment has pedagogical value, it is not to warn the child against vice because a leprechaun is a leprechaun, but to compel her to spend quality time with her parents on this project that inducts her into the adult regime, where success requires manipulation of corrupted little men through acts of imagination. So we settle on a mason jar filled with gelt left over from Hanukkah. To lure her leprechaun inside, she twists a stepladder from pipe cleaners. Red step, yellow, green step, blue. It rises to the rim and curls over. When the leprechaun ascends her rainbow to the summit, he will pause a moment in awe and horror, the surge of impulse saying yes, the weight of experience no. When he cannonballs into chocolate gold, he will land in a heaven that is also prison. He will laze against glass for a solitary night in the elementary school hallway, amid radiators softly clicking and three-dimensional book reports. Binging on gelt, stuffing gold foil wrappers into his satchel, he will be the bearer of his own subjection until sunrise, when the chocolate ends. Belt buckle loosened, stovepipe hat in his hands, he will pace in circles, warbled chatter flooding the jar, his walls semi-transparent, admitting light but no clarity, except for the hole above him, in view, out of reach. This makes her sad, she confesses, and I agree. But he will have no regrets, because he does not make decisions. He is a condition. And to succeed, her leprechaun trap must make her feel the purgative power of tragedy. Plus, I tell her as we wait for the bus, there is no such thing as leprechauns. I know, Papa, she says. I already know. I apologize for the dinging. I think there's people trying to text me about various other goings on in the world, and I don't know how to turn off the dinging because I'm not that technologically advanced. So I'm just going to mea culpa and move on. In a hunter's orange hat and solid steel suspenders, my father has painted the blade of his favorite shovel hunter's orange and lopped off its tip with a silicon carbide industrial grinder in a blaze of sparks in order to skim soil better. But when he does, it is too perfect and he cannot let it go, never lets it go. The men in his crew begin to call him Linus as he begins to spray paint sledgehammers, mortar mixers, dike pliers, truck tires, all his fingers, his mornings, his entire maw, hunter's orange. It is all over the place. And I don't know whether it is talisman or addiction. All I remember are the sparks. I'm behind the silo, gouging my fingers into soil in search of buried arrowheads. But when I see his hunter's orange form approaching me like a zombie, dragging his shovel slowly across the shop's concrete floor, I know it has always been coming to this. From the tiny pile of what's been collected, I select 2 slivers of imperfect flint, lean back and smack them together to launch an orange spark that hovers like the lodestar, pulling everything directionless, while somewhere between us, the tomahawks have begun. First light. Believing, as she has evolved, over many millennia to believe that the brightest light at midnight belongs to the clang of the moon on the black ocean glass. The loggerhead turtle hatchling follows her ancient instinct for a luminous source, a carapace writing a line in the sand, flipper over flipper toward the Walmart parking lot. Seven analects. 1, there are 3 topics in aesthetics: love, death, and landscape. 2, there are 2 topics in aesthetics: time and temporality, which are distinct in the way that Jesus and Christ are distinct. 3, there is only a monist brushing her hair in the mirror. 4, then there is a hole in aesthetics where no topics exist. In the hole, if this, then that. But then that nullifies this. Again, the hole, its worms, a landscape. 5, is premature burial the one negative topic in the whole of aesthetics? When Houdini did it, his assistants pulled on his cramped hand the moment it broke up through soil. 6, there are -2 topics in the whole of aesthetics: mathematics and failure, which animate each other. The failure of mathematics is that it has no accepted definition, leading some to call it beautiful and pure. The mathematics of failure contains events that do not accomplish their intended purposes, thereby creating the negative lyric. 7, in the whole of aesthetics, there are -3 topics: the number 7, its glyph, and forgive them, for they know not what they do. Today you will be with me in paradise. Behold your son, behold your mother. Why have you forsaken me? I thirst, I thirst. It is finished. Into your hands I commit my spirit. I'm going to finish with this tiny little eclipse poem. Path of totality. For 2 minutes and 37 seconds, in a shadowed band that stretches coast to coast, all the gold on earlobes, collarbones, and fingers, given in promises, remembrances, and gifts to those arranged on blankets with cardboard solar glasses pressed to upturned eyes, is valueless in darkness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ted. That was beautiful. It's always a pleasure to have you. Just a heads up to everyone involved, you can leave kudos or whatever you want into the chat. So don't be afraid to give these writers the love that they deserve. So up next is Rebecca Copeland. Rebecca Copeland is a writer of fiction and literary criticism and a translator of Japanese literature. Her stories travel between Japan and the American South and touch on questions of identity, belonging, and self-discovery. The Kimono Tattoo, her debut work, takes readers on a journey into Kyoto's intricate world of Komodo design and into a mystery that interweaves family dynamics, loss, and reconciliation. Her academic writings have focused almost exclusively on modern Japanese women writers, their battles against conservative literary expectations, and their wonderful, at times subversive creativity. She has translated the works of writer Yuno Chiyu and novelist Karino Natsuo. Her translations of Karino's The Goddess Chronicle won the PEN Translates Award, English PEN in 2013, and the Japan-US Friendship Commission Prize for the Translation of Japanese Literature, 2014 to 2015. Copeland was born the fourth daughter to missionary parents in a Japan still recovering from the aftermath of war. Shortly after her birth, the family relocated to Wake Forest, North Carolina, where she spent glorious childhood days running carefree through the quiet town and listening to her older sisters relay their stories about Japan. As a junior in college, Copeland had the opportunity to spend a year in Japan, where she studied traditional dance, learned to wear a kimono, and traveled, making ridiculous mistakes in the Japanese language. Afterwards, she earned a PhD in Japanese literature at Columbia University, and she is now a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. All right, you should be good to go, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you so much, Molly. And thanks Jason Lee Brown and the River Styx and all the sponsors. It's just a real honor to be reading here. And it's also a privilege to be reading with Ted and Jason. As Molly introduced, I'm a translator of Japanese and a professor of Japanese literature, but I've always been a huge fan of mystery fiction. And years ago, my sister Beth introduced me to the author Sujata Massey. Sujata is an American who writes mystery fiction set in Japan. I think now she's writing mystery fiction set in India, but I loved her series. And then I discovered St. Louis's own Zhou Xiaolong, who writes mystery fiction set in China. He has created a very erudite detective who spouts T.S. Eliot as he's chasing down criminals. And I thought, well, maybe I could do something similar. So in 2012, I sat down to work on writing my own mystery novel. And this June, finally published The Kimono Tattoo with Brother Mockingbird Publishing. So I'll be reading from the novel tonight. I'll be reading 3 scenes and provide a little bit of background and context first. So it will surely come as no surprise that the Kimono Tattoo is about a tattoo that resembles a kimono. It's not that the tattoo is in the shape of a kimono, but that the design of the tattoo mimics kimono fabric. To be more precise, the design mimics an actual set of Japanese screens by 17th century artist Tosa Mitsuoki. And these gorgeous gold leaf screens depict fluttering poem strips hanging from maple and cherry tree branches. The screens are now housed in the Art Institute of Chicago. So just in case you wanted to know, they look like this. So there actually are screens like that in Chicago, but to my knowledge, there is not a tattoo version yet. The Kimono Tattoo features Ruth Bennett, an American woman who grew up in Kyoto because her parents were missionaries there. As an adult, Ruth earned a PhD in Japanese literature and tried to make a career in the United States, but failed to get tenure, and then she failed in her marriage. So 40 years old, nothing to show for herself. She's at a particularly low point in her life when she retreats back to Kyoto and to memories of her childhood. There she ekes out a living translating computer manuals and other such documents from Japanese into English. It's a very tedious job, very boring, but Ruth kind of likes it that way because at least she knows what to expect from one day to another. And then one day, a mysterious woman appears on Ruth's doorstep in Kyoto and asks her to translate a novel yet unpublished, by a long forgotten and presumed dead writer. It's a rather odd request, but Ruth is so flattered that she can't say no, even though saying yes jeopardizes the only job she has. The woman warns Ruth that she can't tell anyone what she's translating. So before Ruth has even finished the first chapter, which is all the woman has given her, she comes across a scene, and this is the scene I'll read here. The scene is narrated in the first person by a character that Ruth believes is a thinly veiled stand-in for the author of the chapter she's been asked to translate. He has traveled to a hot spring resort near Tokyo to meet his sister named Satoko. And he hasn't seen his sister in many years. So here's the scene. By the time I reached the inn, Satoko had already checked in, but she was not to be found in her room, the gardens, or the baths. When she still had not returned by 6 p.m., I decided to go look for her. When I stepped out onto the bridge spanning the Hokigawa River, I saw what looked like a woman resting along the rocky shore. Difficult to discern in the waning light, she seemed to be wearing a richly patterned kimono. I hurried down from the bridge, and as I drew closer, I realized she was not wearing a kimono. She was naked. Had her painted? Stumbling over the rocky ground, I crept up beside her. She didn't move. I jostled her shoulder, noticing when I did, her skin was cold to the touch. I also noticed the design coloring her back, legs, and arms was not paint. It was a tattoo, or tattoos. Across her left shoulder ranged a design of red maple leaves, each leaf so finely wrought you could feel them shimmer in the light of the newly risen moon. Along the other shoulder was a cluster of cherry blossoms, tissue pale, almost translucent. From the branches of both the maple and the cherry dangled tanzaku poetry slips. Each slip was so intricately painted, the woman's skin became the washi paper of the slips. Hesitating, afraid of what I'd see, I rolled the woman over. Her eyes were open, and her mouth was covered in thick, dark blood. Satoko. Okay, so that's the end of that scene. Naturally, Ruth finds this scene creepy, but she grows even more unsettled when the next day she sees on the news that a woman's body has been discovered along the very same river. There's no mention of a tattoo. Ruth wonders, does she have information of a crime? Or is the tattooed corpse in the novel just fiction? She decides to research tattoos. She isn't certain if it's even possible to have a tattoo designed like a kimono that resembles a famous screen. To do this, she turns to her friend Maho, a young Japanese woman who grew up in the United States and sports a number of tattoos herself, along with a pink mohawk and piercings. Maho takes Ruth to meet her tattooist named Horiichi. In Japanese, the word for one of the words for tattooist is horishi. Horiichi means number one horishi. So here's the scene. Maho introduced me, telling me the master's name was Horiichi. I bowed, thanking him for taking the time to meet me. He nodded, folded his arms across his chest and stared at me. No one spoke for some time. I understand you have questions about a tattoo, Horiichi asked, finally. Yes, I'm curious if it would be possible to get a tattoo with kimono designs. Why? Well, it seems unusual. I thought most tattoos are of heroic characters or images from myths and legends, dragons, samurai, peacocks, peonies, that sort of thing. No. Why are you curious about a kimono tattoo? Well, I wondered if it was possible. Ohorishi is an artist. We make art. Anything is possible. But you're right, kimono tattoos are rare. In fact, I only know of one, and what I want to know now is how you came to ask about it. The term horishi comes from the word to carve, horu, his needles to carve under the skin and deposit ink. This particular horishi was staring at me so intently, I felt as if my skin were being pricked and gouged. I've read about the tattoo. You read about it, but you haven't seen it. No, I haven't seen it. Where did you read about the tattoo? I'm sorry, I can't give you any more information. The horishi turned his head to one side and squinted. And what did you read? I read about a woman whose body was covered in a tattoo that looked like a kimono. And I just wanted to learn more about tattooing. How is the tattoo described? It had several different elements, from an assortment of dye patterns to poetic scenes. What fascinated me was the suggestion that the tattoo was so elaborate, it represented several layers of fabric. It must be very difficult to achieve that with tattoo ink. Not for a talented horishi. About the poetic scene, did it look like this one? The horishi reached for the book on the table beside him and opened it to a page that had been marked. I now saw the book was a museum catalog, and the illustration he marked was of Tosa Mitsuoki's famous poem slip screen. I felt a shudder run up the back of my spine. Yes, I could only manage a whisper. I don't know you, the horishi said, and I don't know what you're involved in, but you must stop. It's dangerous. You may already be in danger, and you may have invited danger on the person who wears this tattoo. You must stop. What do you mean? Who has the tattoo? That's enough. You've been warned. Please just tell me why it's dangerous. Maho. The horishi turned to Maho, who looked stricken. You will leave now. Do not bring your friend here again. The horishi stood up and walked out of the room. Maho and I exchanged glances, uncertain of what had just happened. What did you do? Maho hissed. I don't know, I said, but I had an inkling. So that's the end of this scene. And following this encounter, Ruth finally tells Maho about the novel she's translating and the tattooed body it features. She also reveals to Maho more about her own experiences in Kyoto and the fact that she once had a little brother who disappeared one day and was never found. As the novel continues, the story of the kimono tattoo and the loss of Ruth's brother become entwined. When I began working with my publisher on the marketing of the book, she informed me that I would need a tagline. I don't know. I've never written a tagline. As the novel is complex, it was a challenge for me to come up with a line that incorporated the gist, but also might sound appealing. With the help of my sister and a number of my friends, I eventually landed on this one. Silk unravels, a tattoo is forever. Layer by layer, the truth is revealed. Like a kimono, everything about the novel is layered. The storyline, the imagery, the characters, and certainly the narrative structure, which includes texts within texts. The following excerpt, which will be the last one I will read tonight, encapsulates the sense of layers. Here, as Ruth is on her way to meet Maho, she passes by one of Kyoto's most venerable sites. So here's the scene. The Nanzen temple grounds were nearly empty as I cut across them, except for a man feeding pigeons by Sanmon Gate. People love Kyoto because of its rich history. Almost any point in the city will yield a story about an event that happened there in the 8th century, in a later event in the 11th century, and so on. History wraps the city in layers. The waves of history undulate and overlap, allowing us to go backwards in time even as we go forward. And my history was there too, my stories also settling into the sediment. Whenever I saw the great Sanmon at Nanzen Temple, I remembered the way my little brother and I used to play there on occasion. We would wrap our arms around the pillars of the gate and try to touch each other's hands. Our arms were too short, but each year we seemed to get closer and closer. The pillars were lighter in color near the base from all the hands that patted and rubbed the wood. And my brother's handprints were there, and mine too, pressed into the history of the temple, becoming part of the story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was so interesting. I actually saw those in Chicago, which is very cool because I could have like a nice visual. All right, so we're gonna end the night on with Jason Summer. He is the author of 5 poetry collections, most recently Portalins in the University of Chicago's Phoenix Poets series. His other 2 Phoenix books are Other People's Troubles, which won the Society of Midlands Authors Award and was a finalist for the Penn USA West Award, and The Man Who Sleeps in My Office, finalist for Kansas City Star's William Rockwell Nelson Award. The Laughter of Adam and Eve was published by Southern Illinois University as winner of the Crab Orchard Review competition. Poems from his first collection, Lifting the Stone from Forest Books, London, have been broadcast on the BBC World Service. Summer has been recognized with an Anna Davidson Rosenberg Award for poems about the Jewish experience and read from his work at the National Holocaust Memorial Museum's program, Speech and Silence, Poetry in the Holocaust. A former Stanford University Stegner Fellow, he has held a Whitting Foundation Writers Fellowship, fellowships from the Bread Loaf and Swanee's Writers Conferences, as well as a residency with the YMCA's National Writers Voice Project. He has published translations of Irish language poems and with Hanlin Zahn, collaborative book-length translation of Chinese fiction, Wayne in Love and Bondage, 3 novellas by Wan Zhibao, and The Bathing Woman by Ting Ning, which was longlisted for the Man Asian Prize. A memoir titled Joining the Story, Returning with My Survivor Father to the Killing Fields of Eastern Europe is forthcoming in spring 2020 from Imagine, a Charles Bridge adult imprint. He lives in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay. I would have, if had I known it was that long, the introduction, I would have cut it down to a couple of sentences. I'm going to read a few poems. I haven't a lot of choices in a way. I'm going to read just from Portulans, my latest book. They tend to be longer poems, and you know, they're tough to just sit still and listen to. I'm going to read a couple of short ones. And then venture into something a little bit longer, mid-sized. Someone once told me, I think it was an anecdote out of the Writers Workshop in Iowa, that I think it was Marvin Bell said something like, every poet wants to write long poems, but nobody wants to read them. I hope not to prove that tonight. First poem I'll read is I'm inordinately proud of, because it's a sonnet on one rhyme, kind of a short sonnet on one rhyme. And it's called Grudge. Grudge. The last of a late night's argument, the dreadful unsnarling of intent, our what you said and what I meant, and neither of us penitent, though nearly ready to relent in laughter as we get the scent of our absurdity, each pent to a bed's edge, when the apartment takes its turn as the respondent, the babbling pipes, the sighing vent. After the hours and anger spent, what I continue to resent is how some sliver of a moment sleep comes for you and for me doesn't. Sort of continue in in a domestic vein. This is a poem called Children Wearing My Shoes. And it's about children wearing my shoes. Which kids will do, you know. But I make something dismal out of it, I think. Children wearing my shoes. My children have put on my shoes, the pair of them, male and female we made them, and boots with laces trailing, the shoes mates, the boy and girl not, often contenders, all together now in this. First, the single pair divided between them without dispute, one shoe off, one shoe on, feet lost in them, leg in up to the shin. At the limp and drag pass in front of my chair, I put my book down, but they turn away before I can speak, kicking the footwear into the corner and gone back to the closet and back again in motley, mad shod, a singleton on each foot. The separated twins of his sneaker and slipper, her mismatch of sandals. They crisscross the room, quickening the shuffle to slam the heels on the floorboards, not looking at me, not answering to their names, intent on the performance only, looking past even each other, a flash of the whites of eyes rolling, mouths open, the spooked horse look, and a few cries of half-stifled laughter, but the fourth wall kept intact as they discard onto the little mound in the corner and race out to return with two pairs undivided on each, old loafers on her, but he's gone formal, processional glide of the long sedans of gleaming black brogues, brougham hearses. I am here, I want to tell them, still here. I'll venture well, here's one that's a little sort of antic. It's called the Old Art. I figure after the sort of standard themes, you know, a lover's quarrel and the mortality, the message of mortality sent by one's children to one all the time, but particularly in wearing shoes that are yours. This is called the Old Art. The old art moved from left to right, plotted, knotted up, unknotted, stopped, turned around, pointed, well, twirled really, could just about say anything, but wouldn't just say anything, sure that you were listening. It overheard, speaking prettily, meaning to please whatever else it means, saying, you have been here, yes, you will come here, no. It suffered and sinned, but only hinted at the tedium. The old art doubled back, coincided, came around again, tethered itself to a history it would rather have had or would rather not have had, made up its mind in either case. It was a good time, it was not so good a time. Somewhere quite close or further off, there's revolution, war. But beyond all that, and in the midst, closer yet, deeper in, there's a person alone, or two together alone, out of the group of friends, the small circle made by a series of random encounters of the sort only an evil genius or a beneficent deity or an indifferent fate might devise. For the old art, it was origins as much as destinations. It leapt up when it beheld, and it beheld and leapt, and had the income and the leisure mostly. However, the old art raced the body up a hill, reaching the top, heart pounding, crashed through a door, grappled with the other there were others there, and a house. And the old art rose to its full height, swelled to the swell of the music, and paid off whomever had it coming, dispensing just desserts, grand kindnesses, a boon, the sudden gravity of our attractions falling on us, Everyone, presumably in Mombasa too, pretending to be them also, one at a time or more. The old art never, the old art always, thrum and hum and tum-to-tum, a great tree branching out from the past. The old art had wit, biting and bitten, and wants us better, betterable, impersonates an officer if necessary, could and did, uncanny, the old art just like and like unto, alas, and then adieu, the old art. I'll try a mid-sized one now. It's my effort to have a poem with kind of everything in it. It's called In the Basement is the Previous Culture. And I think it's sort of the reality of basements, especially ones that I have had. I don't need an intervention. I'm not hoarding things or anything, but there's just a lot of things in the basement, and this trades on that. In the basement is the previous culture, and the ones previous to it ad infinitum, in no order, heaped, leaned, and shelved as for a sorting likely destined never to occur. Portions of collections once considered entire, and items no longer answering the question, how? But what might they be? A zenith radio at nadir, for certain, from the era of the ear. The man descending to the superseded objects to see what else might have returned to value has come halfway now to the landing by hand tools hung in an outline of themselves. There are no words beneath the shape of things. Hammer that is still the dream dreamt for the fist, the digits of the pliers equal and opposing and in steel. With the stairs turn, what he goes down to rises up before him. Against the western wall, for instance, the tiers of lumber up on bricks where are visible strips of fichu, along with scraps of tulle, among the rags that nest a weather-vane rooster propped against a bucket brimful of pulleys in a fruit crate with a biplane pictured one end. A concertina's bellows drape the other. On the isinglass pane of an unhinged stove door, piled in a willow basket, are printed circuits and a thin chain linked to a stem on an adjacent gas lamp's branch, above brass fig leaves. Just below, a tipped box fans out an avalanche of bills, billets doux, some cellophane packets, one showing Burkina Faso's stamps that had been Volta, one Vichy's that was France. As he enters the crooked aisle between the zinc sink and a Fender bass amp, an upright mangle and steamer trunk, the iron helmet of the furnace starts up in one of its fierce intermittencies, shows fire through the slats of its visor, lights up a drawing by an early person penciled low on the parched fieldstone wall. A child's glyph of stick figures joining hands, male and female, probably bipedal, hardly noticed anymore. After the surveyor's tripod, the architrave and stair spindles in a staved umbrella stand, the treadle sewing machine table, ship's wheel barometers in miniature, astrolabe in replica, on it beside the great globe itself in rounded cardboard, the channel narrows. He sidles by, a toboggan on sore horses, turntable on toboggan, the mountainous still life of slave and master cylinders, motherboard, magneto, churn handle, has a bookend at the summit. Its planes braced by the figure of a lounging coolie, and all of it contained in an orphan drawer, on a suitcase, on valise, on portmanteau, on National Geographic magazines pillared in stacks. He arrives at the metal bank of shelves. There is a mood in which the man will stand there, moved to be eye level with the crockery of the old woman who owned the place before him, met once in her near translucency, bent and bright-eyed bright-eyed as the goddess in crone's disguise. It is a pair of her earthenware planters, toward which he feels a moment as tenderly as for the bakelite set of brush and barrettes that touch the head of his own grandmother and are kept a little higher up. Particulate lies general on everything unshielded. He shuffles across it, fallen when there were none to see it fall. It would keep on the forms at first, like light, like shadow, like light snow drifted thickest near the wall, collecting in declivity, powder of gypsum, powdered lime, dust of the mortar and the stone, of brick, of block, of flesh, sifting down from the floor above, invisibly moting in the dark. He moves to go, the dust already on him as underfoot, the palatal scrape of his steps, a consonant of the language in which his grandfather cleared his throat in the middle of the night and said his prayers in the day, in Volin, the Jerusalem recalled that had gone down in fire to the Jerusalems beneath. Here is another elsewhere, an underground nothing of Jerusalem. Trilobite dust from the vanished mid-continental sea leavens the concrete over quake-twisted strata that hold the scattering of worked flint and chert, and out of the mill of waters, implements of shell, or perhaps only the shells themselves. I'll read just one more, I think. This is a poem sort of from the literary life. Takes place in a seminar of poets and critics, a bunch of them together. Nowhere you really want to be as a civilian. The poem's called Attention, and it has an epigraph from Whitman, who also sort of appears in the body of the narrative. The Whitman line from By Blue Ontario's Shore, the lines are, can your performance face the open fields and the seaside? Does it see behind the apparent custodians the real custodians standing, menacing, silent? Attention. Afraid that no one was reading my book, I went through a period of giving copies away, often to writers whom I knew and liked, but I'm not sure they read it either. Some years before I had a book to give, I heard a famous poet say once that a friend of his, of equal reputation, claimed that beneath all our poems lies a single message, other words pulsing just below the words. What all the lines, the rhythms, the great varieties of language come down to. According to the friend, under his ran the plea, like me, like me, like me. This was told to a group of poets to preface the account of his own discovery on a government tour of Eastern Europe in the tones his Bulgarian translator made of the sounds of his poem. A douser's pluck flashed through him that he was hearing right then what all the cadences amounted to or covered for, there in the rhythm somehow, flowing subterranean, the one phrase, a question, over and over. Are you listening? Are you listening? Even this celebrated man, apparently even him, worried that no one would. However lightly the admission that afternoon, a gathering at another well-known writer's house, someone sublet, wainscoted in dark, trade magazine ads posted in the bathroom from the industry she skewered in a best-selling expose. Routinely, we would extend contemporary poetic traditions past the morning's formal study into lunch together in various assortments, and reuniting afterwards for more impromptu pantheon debate, laurelling and claiming kin with titans and Olympians, making our niche reservations, cleavings to and cleavings from. And matinee went to soiree next, after dinner readings, our own work delivered to each other among local friends and guest readers too. Our seminar director's friend attended once, and our director always as generous with his evening presence as with his daily brilliance. 11 weeks before we ended, with the final class in session around the massive table, closing minutes, And he spoke his parting words for us, not his alone, a section out of Whitman's Blue Ontario for valediction, the part with many and stern questions about what it took to be a poet. Who are you indeed who would talk or sing to America? How the terms were obdurate. What I heard below the lines, a dark bass hum say under his rich baritone, was not you, few, none of you maybe, not you anyhow. Not that he looked my way in particular. He looked around at everyone, up from the book, the way a good speaker makes contact, sweeps eyes over the faces of the audience or just above their heads. He and Whitman, keepers at the gate. This was what I made of it. Last words minatory, whatever he meant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. You know, I hate the hates for longer poems. Like, they're actually quite good, and that's typically what I tend to read, so nothing wrong with that.
Get the book. There's plenty of long poems.
Just heads up, all of our writers' books are in our bookshop, so please support them. I do just want to open this up now for a quick Q&A. I'm going to allow you guys to unmute yourselves if you want. You can also just drop a question, and or Jason Brown, not Jason Summer, not who just read, can ask it for you. Don't be shy, anyone.
Can we talk about a little bit, just, I mean, we have 3 locals. What do you think about St. Louis and the writing community here and what it means to be a writer in the St. Louis area? Anyone who wants to jump in is fine.
None of us are jumping, I see.
I mean, thank you, Jason and Rebecca, for your wonderful readings. I lived in New York for a while, and like being a writer in New York is really fun, but it's not as fortifying as living in a place that has, I think, kind of not just literary institutions, but cultural institutions that allow a person to partake of them for free and generously and repeatedly. So I think being a writer for me in St. Louis is partly based in the ability to go to museums for free and the parks for free, and to have kind of like space to roam without the structural financial pressures that put so many people in a bind. And I think that might be more important for me than anything else. So it has nothing to do with us writers. It's just like, it happens to be kind of a nice thing to partake of.
It's a little hard to talk about the St. Louis literary scene after so much has closed down for so long. You know, there had been around River Styx, for instance, and also the St. Louis Poetry Center, there had been ways to meet other writers in congenial circumstances, and, you know, go to readings, and there had been a lot of in-person opportunities. And, you know, I don't know, there's something about the Midwest that's neighborly in some way, or the culture seems to facilitate a kind of friendly interaction, writer to writer and audience to writer. And that is, I think, different than the coasts in some way.
Rebecca, would you like to give your 2 cents onto the topic?
Well, I've I have benefited immeasurably from the writing community in St. Louis, because it's been my good fortune to take part in the Summer Writers Institute at Washington University in the summer. I mean, that has been my exposure to writing, and I benefited from local writers, Eric Lundgren, Susan Peribo, who grew up in St. Louis and came back to teach at the Writing Center, Summer Writers Institute, and Sylvia Sokop. I mean, it's just such a rich environment. And at the Writers Institute, there are speakers who come. And I think, to echo some of what Jason said, there's not a sense of competitiveness. I mean, there was always a sense of camaraderie and people trying to help each other. Pop-up writing workshops happened after the institutes closed. So I feel it's a very good place to try to make your way as a writer. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I do have a question for you from the chat. This is from Stephen. Can you talk a little about your writing process as a novelist versus your writing process as an academic literary critic? Did you find your approach to be quite different, or did you go about things in a similar fashion?
Thank you, Stephen. It's been difficult to try to find a voice, because I know exactly what I'm doing as an academic, and I lecture all the time, and I like to tell people about, oh, this is Japan. Now let me sit down here. Let me tell you all what that temple, the history of that temple, and so forth. And so I found as a novelist, I was doing way too much exposition, and had to learn to stop it. And I think the Writing Institute helped with that a lot. So again, it took almost 10 years to complete this, to finish the novel and get it published. Another thing I learned was that I thought it was hard to write as an academic. I thought it was hard to publish. It's much more difficult to publish as a creative writer. And so I have so much more respect for the writers that I teach in class, and also the writers here. Now that I have a better understanding of what it takes to get noticed, even to find a publisher, it's hard.
Looks like we have another question. This is from Sylvia. Each of the writers read work tonight that engages at times directly or indirectly with history. How does each writer approach history? How deliberate is that as a theme, or is it something that comes up more organically as the writing process? And out of the three of you, any of you feel free to get that conversation started.
History. Well, I'll jump in, but not particularly these poems in Portulans, but I've written from the testimony of Holocaust survivors, and have felt, I've written my second book is what might be described as a nonfiction group of poems. There are, long poems with history in them, and I guess the kind of history that I've engaged with seems to me, often more significant than the poem, and it stands in my work sometimes as a sense of, a truth with a capital T that one has to acknowledge, in poems that engage with history, that sense that there is a larger thing going on that one must also be true to, while being creative and freely creative. But there is this nagging sense that there are things that have actually happened. At least that haunts my work.
I'm thinking about, actually, I'm grateful for this question, because I was thinking about your basement poem, Jason, and way in which that poem moves reminds me of some of the ways in which I engage with things that are intangible or out of touch, and which is through the physical world and the object world on a kind of horizontal plane through image and tactility and cataloging and inventory and kind of perceptual acuity that invariably leads to an engagement with the histories that are embedded in things and in landscapes and even in poetic forms. You know, something like meters and rhyme schemes are, there's a history of embedded labor in the production and circulation of poetic forms. And so sometimes my books have thematic engagements with history. My newest book is really interested in gold and Spanish imperialism and colonialism, and the kind of ways in which those pursuits resonate in contemporary American life. But they're all accessed through kind of contemporary objects and figures and ways of moving. So for me, history kind of emerges through an engagement with the tactility of the world, in sight and sound, first and foremost.
Yeah, I am so impressed by the depth of history that we see in places like Kyoto that have been around for centuries and centuries, and the way you can drill down and find more and more of interest. And so I was drawn to that aspect in the novel, but I also wanted to play with history. And in Japanese literature, there's a move towards authenticity, right? You want to write the truth. And so history kind of allows the presentation of truth. But in the novel, I rewrite history and tell stories that aren't true, but that are derived from this notion of history.
Yeah, I just thought what Ted said was, yeah, brilliant. The notion of the tactility of objects helping you to drill down, bringing you down, whether you want to or not. You know, willy-nilly, they carry their own history with them. It's funny, when I think of historical, there's a certain segment of history that I am drawn to again and again and again, and that's the history of World War II. You know, the formative for me and my immediate family, and you know, so I didn't even think of that poem as historical, but of course it is. The basement's the previous culture and the history that comes with those objects. Anyway.
Thank you so much for your guys' answers. Do we have any final questions from the audience? I can always ask the go-to one, you know, like, what's your writing process like if we are running on them? But I guess I will. What is your writing process like? And just to put a spin on it, what's your favorite part of the writing process? No one jump on it all at once.
So for me, it's hard because, well, I tend to think I can only write in the summer. During the semesters, I have no bandwidth. Mind is occupied by other things, and I sort of lose any kind of feeling of creativity. But in the summer, I find there's more time to focus on creativity. And the part that I like is when you get an idea, you get the inspiration, and then it comes together. Often it doesn't. The way you have it in your head, it doesn't come out as you had imagined. So when it all comes together, it's like magic. And that's a wonderful feeling. Of course, then you have to rewrite it and try to make it better. But that one moment when you get the idea and it all makes sense, then I like that.
Jason or Ted, if either of you want to speak.
I mean, I don't have any particularly useful processes for anyone else, honestly. It's a mess. It's a glorious mess, as I think it is for a lot of people. I work in kind of bursts, and like anyone would, I feel most alive in those kind of bouts of mania when things are starting to coalesce, whether that's around collecting things into a larger apparatus or a longer engagement. I'm currently writing a novel in verse, which is strange. And I had a few years ago a summer in which I wrote, like 4 large chunks of this in 6 weeks, and I was astounded. I never put so many words on a page as a poet. But I often find that once it's an artifact in any kind of published form, I don't want to say it's dead, but it needs like reanimated with the voice. So for me, there's like something between a moment of coming into being on the page and being read aloud that just feels like this big, scary black hole. I have no advice. Go do what works for you. Drink wine.
Yeah, my process sounds like yours, Ted. I did have the experience last year for about a year and a half of writing prose, writing a memoir. And for the first time in my life, I set out for the coffee shop and expected to write several pages a day, and did. And the reliability, the prosaicness, the prosiness of that process was terrific. I loved it, because I end up, I love that first burst and I get something, and then I torture it to death, or it doesn't work out. And I at one point I think I had like 80% failure rate for my ideas poems. So the only joy I got out of a poem was actually when it was dead, deposited on a page someplace, and I didn't have to worry about failing yet again. So I learned what's enviable, what I suspected was enviable about a prose writer's process. Not to mention having an actual audience, like, that.
Well, I just want to give a huge shout out to the 3 of you, Jason, Rebecca, Ted. You guys all did amazing tonight. Thank you for everyone who came. Thank you for everyone who's still here with us right now. Just a reminder, all these books that were read from are available through our bookshop, but also at local bookstores around the city. Please be sure to show our authors some love and purchase a copy. Like I said before, this recording will be up on YouTube if you wanted to pass the link around. But outside of that, I'll see you guys all in a month for our next installment.